Hello and welcome to this video on Porter's 5 forces model. So in this video we're going to look at what is meant by Porter's 5 forces model, and then we're going to have a go at applying it to determine the level of profitability and attractiveness of different industries. So this is a theory that was created by Michael Porter, and it is another way in which we can kind of evaluate strategies, evaluate whether we want to enter a new market. And really, it's a framework for analysing, for looking at the level of competition within industry. And if we can look at the level of competition within an industry, that helps us to understand and assess whether we want to enter that industry, whether it's likely we'd make a profit, whether we think it's an attractive industry to be in. So Porter argued that when you're doing this analysis, when you're looking at this, you need to really consider 5 forces or 5 factors which will determine whether the industry is likely to be profitable or not. The first one was the suppliers, the nature of the suppliers in the industry and how strong they were in terms of their bargaining power. The second one was the customers. The third one was what's the threat of new entrants, not how many companies are actually in that market at the moment, but is it easy for other businesses to enter? The fourth one is, are there alternatives to the products within that industry or alternative substitute products and goods? And then the last one, what's the rivalry among the existing businesses? How much competition is there and the nature of that among the existing businesses in the industry? When you take all these 5 things into consideration, you get an idea, or you can make an assessment as to how profitable that industry is likely to be and whether it'd be attractive for you to enter it. So this is a kind of a diagram that shows his 5 competing forces. So the first thing to consider perhaps is the suppliers, the bargaining power of suppliers. Are you dealing with one big supplier who can charge you what they like, or are you dealing with lots of little suppliers where you have a lot of power over the fee you pay or the cost that you pay? Then you might also consider the bargaining power of the customers. Can the customer really dictate the terms of the price to you, or actually is the customer quite tied into the product, the good or service that you're selling? We might also consider how easy it is for new companies to enter the market. If there is a high threat of new entrants to the market, it's easy for other companies to come into this industry. Again, maybe it's not that attractive. It's going to be high levels of competition. We might also consider the threat of substitutes. If there's a lot of potential alternatives for a customer, then actually maybe this is not that attractive, the market, or maybe the profits are likely to be lower. And the last thing we might consider is the rivalry among existing firms. So are there a lot of existing firms? What's the nature of the competition between them? And once we've considered these 5 things, we can then make an assessment about the industry, about the market that we're considering. So let's go through a little more detail of this. So the bargaining power of suppliers and customers. So the bargaining power of suppliers, how can I reduce this as a business? You maybe try by looking for new suppliers, so that would limit the power of suppliers. If there's lots of potential new suppliers you might consider. If you were to do buy a company that was your supplier, we call that backward vertical integration, or maybe merge or take over the supplier. Again, that would reduce their power because they become part of your business. How can we reduce the bargaining power of customers? We might try and make it expensive for them to switch to another business, or again, we might look to go forward in terms of buying maybe a dealership or retail outlets, so there's less choice for customers between different places to buy our products. So we would say suppliers are quite powerful when there are only a few large suppliers, or perhaps the resource that they supply is scarce. If there's a cost of switching to an alternative supplier, if my business as a customer is quite small and unimportant compared to all their customers, if there are no substitute resources. Now let's look at the bargaining power of customers. Powerful customers able to exert pressure to drive down prices that I charge them. So supermarket businesses, now we see a smaller number of large supermarkets, and they can exert greater power over their suppliers, which tend to be kind of smaller businesses or farmers perhaps. Now let's move on to look at the threat of new entrants and substitutes. So the threat of new entrants is really about this concept here about barriers to entry. And so that's how hard is it for other firms to enter the market. So for example, having a very strong brand makes it hard for other firms to enter the market, or perhaps needing a license in order to be a business in that industry, again, makes it harder for other firms to enter that market. We might also consider the threat of substitutes. Some firms invest in research and development and develop new patents, so legal protection for new ideas, and they do this over time to try and create substitute products so that their competitors can't compete with them. Here are some examples of barriers to entry. So some firms will find it difficult to enter a market. There's a barrier stopping them to enter the market because they can't compete in terms of cost because the existing company benefits from economies of scale. Again, maybe the existing company has a very strong brand or has very or technology that we can't replicate. And again, that prevents us from entering that industry, acts as a barrier to entry. Having lots of substitute products will mean that we can't charge as high a price, or we might see drops in demand. Often this comes about as a result of technological change. We see the rise of Netflix streaming services have posed a substitute to going out bowling or maybe going out to a bar or something like that. A final factor is looking at the rivalry among existing firms in the industry. So to understand the competitive rivalry, we might look at the number of competitors in the market. Have we got many current and potential businesses within that market? The competition is likely to be more intense perhaps, or higher. If you've got a few firms, maybe less so. Again, the market size and the growth prospects. If it's a fast growing market, a large potential market, we might see greater rivalry. Do the companies within the market currently differentiate their products? Do they have strong brand loyalty? Again, this will mean that there is perhaps less competition, less intense competition if they've already got their market shares sorted. So we've gone through some of the details here to consider whether a market is attractive. We look at 1, we look at 2, we look at 3, we look at 4, and we look at 5. And based on that, we make our assessment as to whether this market is attractive or not. So this is called Porter's 5 forces. So let's now apply this. We can look at maybe a couple of industries. So for example, the airline industry, we have some fairly intense competition going on there. We've seen a lot of customers able to shop around quite easily between different airlines. Airlines really, when they're buying their fuel, for example, don't have much choice over suppliers. If they're buying their aircraft, they've only got Boeing or Airbus really. So again, they're kind of squeezed on the customer side, squeezed on the supplier side. So we see low profits. If we were to look at soft drinks, though, we see a slightly different market. Here, the companies have quite a lot of bargaining power over suppliers. They can source their sugar, the water from many different potential suppliers, so they have a lot of power there. There's only really a couple of large international soft drinks companies. So as a customer, you don't really have much choice ultimately who you're buying from. It's Coca-Cola or it's Pepsi or it's Schweppes. There's not many to choose from. So they tend to have higher profits. Pharmaceuticals, well, again, here there are quite significant barriers to entry. You need to have a license, you need to have patents in order to manufacture these drugs. So that prevents competition within that industry, which allow firms to charge higher profits. The cafes, on the other hand, tend to have quite low barriers to entry. It's relatively easy to set up a cafe, and as a result, competition can be quite intense. So we can use Porter's theory here and look at different industries and identify which of the 5 factors do we think are at play and the impact that will have on the attractiveness of that industry. So we've said here that soft drinks are a good example of quite high profitability in terms of a market. Customers and suppliers have little power. There's high brand loyalty, and there's also potentially barriers to entry in terms of economies of scale that these large companies can employ. So how does Porter's model link with industry profitability? Generally speaking, low profits are associated with strong suppliers, strong customers, low entry barriers, many opportunities for substitutes, and an intense rivalry within the market. Whereas high profits are generally associated with weak suppliers in terms of bargaining power, weak customers in terms of bargaining power, high barriers to entry, few opportunities for substitutes, and low levels of rivalry within the market. So in this video, we've looked at Porter's 5 forces model, which is a way that we can make an assessment about the profitability of a potential market if we're considering entering that as one of our strategic options. And then we've looked latterly at trying to apply this to some example industries. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.